I thought I had raised decent children. I thought 45 years of sacrifice, love, and guidance had built something meaningful. But sitting in my favorite armchair that Tuesday evening, listening to my own flesh and blood argue over my possessions like vultures circling a carcass, I realized how wrong I had been. They spoke about me as if I were already in the ground, dividing up my life's work with the cold calculation of strangers. That conversation changed everything, and by the end of that week, I had rewritten my will in a way that would teach them the most valuable lesson of their lives. Before we carry on, please hit the subscribe button to make my day and let me know where you are watching from in the comments. My name is Ruth Bennett. I'm 79 years old, and what I don't lack is stories. I was born in Cedar Rapids, Iowa, back in 1944, when families still gathered around radio sets and children respected their elders without question. I've lived through wars, recessions, the rise of technology, and countless changes that would make your head spin. But nothing, and I mean nothing, prepared me for the betrayal I would witness in my own living room on that autumn evening. The house had been unusually quiet that Tuesday. My arthritis was acting up something fierce, so I had settled into my worn leather armchair, the one Martha had bought me for our 20th wedding anniversary. God rest her soul, she had been gone for 8 years now, but her presence still lingered in every corner of our home. The October wind rattled the windows, and I could hear the old oak tree in the backyard creaking under the weight of another harsh Midwest autumn. David had arrived first, my eldest at 4 to 5. He walked in without knocking, which had become his habit ever since Martha passed. Behind him came Ruth, my daughter, 42 and always carrying herself like she owned the world. They exchanged pleasantries with me, asked about my health, inquired if I needed anything from the grocery store. Standard operating procedure for their visits, which had become more frequent lately, though I couldn't quite put my finger on why. I must have dozed off in my chair because the next thing I knew, their voices were drifting in from the kitchen. At first, I thought nothing of it. Siblings catch up, discuss their lives, their children, their work. But as my hearing sharpened and sleep fully left me, the content of their conversation made my blood run cold. The house alone has to be worth at least $400,000, David was saying, his voice carrying that businessman tone he used when discussing deals at his insurance agency. Maybe more, given how the market's been lately. And that's not even counting all the stuff inside. Ruth's laugh was sharp, calculating. Stuff? David, some of that stuff is worth more than your car. Did you see Mom's China collection? And all her jewelry? I've been researching those pieces online. Some of them are genuine antiques. I felt my chest tighten. They were discussing Martha's belongings, our belongings, like items in an estate sale catalog. What about Dad's workshop? David continued. All those tools, that vintage machinery he collected over the years. I bet there's $15,000 worth of equipment out there, easy. I don't care about rusty old tools, Ruth replied dismissively. I'm more interested in the practical assets. The house, the bank accounts, the life insurance policy. Do we even know how much he has saved up? David's voice dropped lower, but I could still make out every word. I've been trying to get him to show me his financial statements for months. He's stubborn about it, but I know for a fact he's got money tucked away. Remember how he was always working, even after retirement? All those side jobs, that consulting work he did for the manufacturing plant? Plus, Mom was careful with money. There's no way they spent everything. We need to start planning, Ruth said matter-of-factly. I mean, let's be realistic here. Dad's almost 80. How much longer can he really have? And when the time comes, we can't be scrambling around trying to figure out where everything is. We need to know now. The casual way she discussed my remaining time on Earth hit me like a physical blow. I gripped the arms of my chair, my knuckles white with tension. The thing is, David continued, we don't even know if he has a current will. The last time anyone mentioned it was years ago, and who knows what's in it. For all we know, he could be planning to leave everything to some charity or something crazy like that. Ruth snorted. Dad's not that sentimental. He's practical. He knows family comes first. Besides, we're his only children. Where else would it go? Still, David pressed. We should probably start bringing it up more often. Gently, you know? Maybe suggest he get his affairs in order for his own peace of mind. Make it sound like we're looking out for him. Good idea. I can work on him from the emotional angle. Talk about how it would ease his worries to know everything is settled. You know how he hates uncertainty. I sat there in my chair, feeling like I was listening to strangers discuss a business transaction. These were the children I had raised, the ones I had sacrificed for, worked double shifts to put through college, supported through divorces and job losses, and every crisis life had thrown their way. What if he wants to split everything 50-50? Ruth asked, and I could hear the concern in her voice. Then we figure out how to make that work for both of us, David replied. Though, honestly, I think I should get a larger share of the house. I'm the one who's been helping him with maintenance and repairs. I've probably put $5,000 of my own money into this place over the years. 5,000? Ruth's voice rose. I've been doing all his grocery shopping, taking him to doctor appointments, managing his medications. Do you know how much time that takes? Time is money, David. We're not going to fight about this, David Ashra said firmly. We'll work it out when the time comes. The important thing is making sure we're both on the same page and that Dad doesn't do anything unexpected. Ruth agreed. Exactly. We just need to stay involved, stay visible, make sure we're the obvious choices. As their conversation drifted to other topics, I remained frozen in my chair, processing what I had just heard. My own children, the two people I loved most in this world, were essentially planning my funeral while I sat breathing in the next room. They weren't concerned about my well-being or my happiness in my remaining years. They were concerned about their inheritance. The betrayal cut deeper than anything I had experienced since losing Martha. At least when she died, it was cancer that took her, not a choice she made to abandon me. But this felt like a conscious decision by my children to view me as nothing more than an obstacle between them and what they considered rightfully theirs. I thought back to all the sacrifices I had made over the years. Working 16-hour days at the plant to pay for David's college tuition, taking out a second mortgage to help Ruth and her ex-husband buy their first house, the countless times I had been there for them, financially and emotionally, without question or expectation of return. And this was how they saw me now, an aging inconvenience standing between them and financial gain. That night, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, my mind racing. Martha's side of the bed felt emptier than usual, and I found myself wishing desperately that I could talk to her about what I had heard. She would have known what to do. She always did. By morning, I had made my decision. I waited until both David and Ruth had left for work. Then I called my attorney, Harold Jameson. Harold and I had known each other for over 30 years. He had handled the legal work when Martha and I bought the house, had drawn up our original wills, and had guided us through various legal matters over the decades. If anyone could help me navigate this situation, it was Harold. Sam? Harold's voice was warm when he answered the phone. How are you holding up? I've been better, Harold. Listen, I need to schedule an appointment to review my will, and I need to make some changes. There was a pause on the other end. Of course. Is everything all right? You sound troubled. I considered how much to tell him over the phone. Let's just say I've had some recent revelations about my family situation. I prefer to discuss the details in person. Absolutely. Can you come in this afternoon? I had a cancellation, so I have some time around 2 o'clock. Perfect. I'll see you then. The drive to Harold's office gave me time to think about exactly what I wanted to do. I wasn't acting out of spite or anger, though both emotions were certainly present. This was about teaching a lesson, about making my children understand the values that should matter in life. Respect, compassion, genuine care for others, these were things that couldn't be inherited or bought. Harold's office hadn't changed much in 3 decades. The same wooden bookshelves lined the walls, filled with leather-bound legal volumes. The same family photos sat on his desk, though his grandchildren were considerably older now. Harold himself looked every one of his 75 years, his hair completely white and his face lined with age, but his eyes were still sharp and his mind as keen as ever. Sam, he said, rising from his chair to shake my hand. "You look well. Please, sit down and tell me what's on your mind." I settled into the familiar chair across from his desk and took a deep breath. "Harold, what I'm about to tell you might sound extreme, but I need you to hear me out." For the next 20 minutes, I recounted the conversation I had overheard, the casual way my children had discussed my death and their inheritance, their calculation about my remaining years, and their strategic planning. For maximum benefit, Harold listened without interruption, his expression growing more serious as I spoke. When I finished, Harold leaned back in his chair and was quiet for a long moment. "Sam, I have to ask, and please don't take this the wrong way, but are you certain you understood the conversation correctly? Sometimes when we're feeling vulnerable or isolated, we can misinterpret things." I had expected this question and appreciated Harold's thoroughness. "Harold, I may be 79, but my hearing is fine and my mind is sharp. I know what I heard. They weren't discussing how to care for me or make my remaining years comfortable. They were discussing how to position themselves for my death." Harold nodded slowly. "All right then. What would you like to do about it?" "I want to rewrite my will completely. I want to leave the bulk of my estate to charity, specifically to the Children's Home of Cedar Rapids. I want to leave my children enough to show that I haven't forgotten them, but not enough to make them wealthy. I want them to understand that inheritance is a privilege, not a right, and it's earned through love and respect, not through blood relation." End quote. Harold pulled out a legal pad and began making notes. "The Children's Home is an excellent choice. I know they do wonderful work with orphaned and abandoned children. How much were you thinking of leaving to David and Ruth?" I had thought about this carefully. $25,000 each. Enough to be meaningful. Enough to help them if they're in real need, but not enough to solve all their problems or eliminate the need for them to work and be responsible for their own lives. "And the rest of your estate?" "The house. The remainder of my savings. Martha's jewelry collection. Everything else goes to the Children's Home. I want to establish a fund in Martha's name for educational programs." Harold continued writing, occasionally asking clarification questions about specific assets and my wishes for their distribution. The process took nearly 2 hours, but when we were finished, I felt a sense of relief I hadn't experienced in days. "Now, Sam," Harold said as he reviewed his notes, "I need to make sure you understand the implications of this decision. Your estate is substantial, based on what you've told me about your assets. We're talking about roughly $800,000 that will go to charity instead of to your children. That's money that would significantly impact their lives, and the lives of their children." End quote. "I understand that completely," I replied. "And that's exactly why this lesson is so important. My grandchildren will learn more from seeing their parents have to earn their way in life than they would from inheriting a fortune they didn't work for. There's also the matter of how your children will react when they learn about these changes. Have you thought about whether you want to tell them beforehand or let them find out after your passing?" This was the question I had been wrestling with since making my decision. Part of me wanted to confront them immediately, to let them know I had heard their conversation and how deeply it had hurt me. But another part of me wanted to wait, to see if their behavior would change over time, if they would show genuine care and concern for my well-being rather than just strategic positioning for inheritance. "I think I want to wait," I said finally. "I want to see how they treat me going forward. If they show real love and respect, if they demonstrate that they care about me as a person and not just as a source of future wealth, then maybe I'll reconsider. But if they continue down this path, if they keep treating me like a business transaction, then the will stands as written." Harold nodded approvingly. "That sounds like a fair approach. It gives them an opportunity to redeem themselves while ensuring that your final wishes reflect their actual behavior toward you." As I drove home that afternoon, I felt a mixture of sadness and empowerment. Sadness, because I wished this situation had never arisen, because I wished my children were the people I had hoped I was raising them to be. But empowerment because I had taken control of a situation that had made me feel helpless and betrayed. The next few weeks passed quietly. David and Ruth continued their regular visits, though I noticed they seemed more attentive to details about the house, more interested in my daily routines and my health status. They asked more questions about my finances, disguised as concern for my security and well-being. "Dad, you know you should really have someone helping you manage your money," Ruth said during one visit, her tone carefully casual. "I knew a good financial advisor who specializes in working with seniors. He could help make sure everything is optimized for your situation." "I appreciate the thought," I replied. "But Harold has been helping me with financial matters for years. I'm comfortable with the current arrangement." David tried a different approach. "Have you given any thought to updating your will recently? I know it's not a comfortable subject, but it's important to make sure everything is current, especially with tax law changes and everything." "My will is up to date," I said truthfully. "Harold and I reviewed everything recently." I could see the relief in his eyes, though he didn't know that the updated will was not what he was hoping for. As winter approached, I found myself observing my children more carefully, looking for signs of genuine affection versus strategic behavior. Ruth brought me groceries every week, but she always seemed rushed and distracted during her visits. She would check items off a mental list, asking about my health, my needs, my plans, but she rarely sat down for a real conversation. David helped with household repairs and maintenance, but he spent most of his time evaluating the work that needed to be done, often mentioning how much various improvements would add to the house's value. Neither of them asked about my loneliness or my grief over losing Martha. Neither seemed interested in my stories or my memories. They were dutiful in their care, but it felt mechanical, performative. The exception came during Thanksgiving dinner. All three of my grandchildren were there, David's 2 kids and Ruth's daughter, and for a few hours, the house felt alive again. The grandchildren wanted to hear stories about their grandmother, about the old days, about my experiences growing up during World War II. They asked genuine questions and listened to the answers. They helped in the kitchen and played board games and reminded me why family mattered. But I also noticed how David and Ruth behaved around their children. They were loving parents, attentive and engaged, which made their treatment of me even more puzzling and hurtful. They clearly understood how to show care and affection. They simply chose not to extend that same consideration to me. After Thanksgiving, I had a long conversation with Harold about my observations. "I keep hoping I'll see a change," I told him. "Some sign that they truly care about my well-being rather than just their inheritance. But everything feels calculated, strategic. Have you considered that they might genuinely believe they're showing care in their own way?" Harold asked. "Some people express love through practical actions, rather than emotional connection." I had considered that possibility, and it gave me some comfort. But it didn't change the fundamental issue. "Even if that's true, Harold." The conversation I overheard revealed their true priorities. They weren't discussing how to make me more comfortable or how to spend more quality time with me. They were discussing how to position themselves for maximum financial benefit when I die. Harold agreed that the conversation was telling. "Well, Sam, the choice is ultimately yours. The will is drawn up according to your wishes. You can change it at any time if their behavior improves." As the months passed, I found myself becoming more philosophical about the situation. I began to see it as an opportunity to do something meaningful with my life's work. The Children's Home of Cedar Rapids had been serving orphaned and disadvantaged children for over 60 years. The money Martha and I had accumulated through decades of hard work and careful saving would continue to benefit children long after we were both gone. In a way, it felt like a more lasting legacy than simply transferring wealth to children who already had comfortable lives. I also began to appreciate the smaller moments in my daily routine. Morning coffee while reading the newspaper. Evening walks around the neighborhood when the weather permitted. Phone calls with old friends who were still alive and coherent. Television shows that Martha and I had enjoyed watching together. These simple pleasures became more precious as I realized how much of my emotional energy I had been spending worrying about my children's motivations. Spring arrived early that year, and with it came a renewed sense of energy and purpose. I decided to volunteer at the children's home, partly to see firsthand how they operated and partly to feel useful again. The administrator, a kind woman named Margaret Chen, welcomed me warmly and found meaningful ways for me to contribute despite my age and physical limitations. I began reading to some of the younger children twice a week. Many of them had never had a grandfather figure in their lives, and they responded enthusiastically to my stories and attention. I helped with basic maintenance around the facility, using skills I had developed over decades of home ownership. I even assisted with fundraising efforts, writing letters, and making phone calls to potential donors. The work was deeply satisfying in a way I hadn't expected. These children had been abandoned or orphaned, yet they showed more genuine affection and appreciation for my presence than my own children had in years. They listened to my stories with rapt attention. They hugged me spontaneously. They remembered details about my life and asked follow-up questions during subsequent visits. Margaret noticed my attachment to the work and the children's response to me. "Mr. Bennett," she said one afternoon, "you've become such an important part of our community here. The children absolutely adore you, and your practical help has been invaluable. I hope you know how much we've seen. Appreciate everything you're doing." Her words meant more to me than she probably realized. They reminded me that my value as a person wasn't dependent on my bank account or my possessions. I could still contribute meaningfully to the world, still make a positive difference in people's lives. One evening in late spring, David and Ruth both happened to visit at the same time. They found me in the kitchen, preparing dinner and humming an old song Martha used to sing while cooking. "You seem happy tonight, Dad," Ruth observed, and for the first time in months, her comment felt genuine rather than perfunctory. "I am happy," I replied. "I've been volunteering at the children's home, and it's been incredibly rewarding. You should see these kids, Ruth. They've been through so much, but they're still so full of hope and curiosity." David looked up from his phone, where he had been scrolling through messages. "The children's home? That's the orphanage on 5th Street, right?" "It's much more than an orphanage," I corrected. "They provide comprehensive services for children who need homes and families, educational support, counseling, life skills training. It's really remarkable what they accomplish with limited resources." "That's nice, Dad," Ruth said, though I could tell she was already mentally moving on to other topics. "How are you feeling health-wise? Any issues with your blood pressure medication?" And just like that, we were back to the familiar pattern. Polite concern about my physical condition, practical questions about my daily needs, but no real interest in what was bringing meaning and joy to my life. That night, I called Harold and told him about my volunteer work and my increasing certainty that my decision about the will was correct. "Sam, you sound more content than you have in months," Harold observed. "The volunteer work seems to be really good for you." "It is, Harold, and it's clarified something important for me. These children at the home, they have nothing in terms of material wealth, but they understand gratitude and genuine human connection in ways that my own children seem to have forgotten. When I think about my money going to support their futures, their education, their opportunities, it feels right in a way that leaving it to David and Ruth doesn't anymore." Have you given any thought to telling your children about your volunteer work with the organization that will inherit their inheritance? It might help them understand your decision when the time comes. I had considered this, but I worried it would seem too pointed, too much like I was deliberately trying to send them a message. I think I prefer to let my actions speak for themselves. If they're interested in what's important to me, they'll ask more questions and engage with what I'm doing. If they're not, then that tells me everything I need to know. As summer approached, my routine had settled into a comfortable pattern. Volunteer work at the children's home 3 days a week, maintenance and household tasks on the other days. Regular visits from David and Ruth that had become predictable in their superficiality, and occasional deeper conversations with Harold about life, aging, and the legacy we leave behind. The children at the home had started calling me Grandpa Sam, a title that filled me with more pride and joy than any business achievement I had ever earned. I knew their names, their stories, their dreams for the future. I helped with homework and listened to their problems and celebrated their successes. In return, they gave me a sense of purpose and belonging that had been missing from my life since Martha's death. One afternoon in July, I was reading to a group of younger children when Margaret approached me with a serious expression. "Mr. Bennett, could I speak with you privately for a moment?" I followed her to her office, wondering if there was some problem with my volunteer work or if one of the children had been in an accident. "Please, sit down," Margaret said, gesturing to the chair across from her desk. "I wanted to talk with you about something that's been brought to my attention." I sat down, my mind racing through possibilities. "One of our board members mentioned that you've been asking questions about our financial needs and our long-term funding situation. I want you to know that we appreciate your interest in our sustainability, but I hope you don't feel pressured to make any kind of financial contribution beyond the invaluable volunteer work you're already doing." End quote. I realized that my questions about the organization's budget and programs had been noticed and possibly misinterpreted. "Margaret, I appreciate your sensitivity about this, but I want to assure you that my interest in the home's financial situation comes from a good place. I'm not feeling pressured to contribute, and my volunteer work isn't conditional on anything." She looked relieved, but still curious about my interest in their funding. "The truth is, Margaret, I've been thinking about ways to help the home beyond my current volunteer work. I'm an old man with no immediate family financial needs, and I want to make sure my resources go to causes that matter. The work you do here matters tremendously." End quote. Margaret's expression softened. "Mr. Bennett, that's incredibly generous of you to consider. Any support you could provide would be deeply appreciated. But please know that your presence here, your time with the children, that's already a gift beyond measure." As I drove home that afternoon, I reflected on the conversation and on the broader journey I have been on since overhearing David and Ruth's conversation almost a year earlier. The pain of their betrayal had led me to discover something far more meaningful than I could have imagined. My relationship with the children at the home had restored my sense of purpose and reminded me of what really mattered in life. That evening, David called to check in, as he did every few days. "Hi, Dad. How was your day?" "It was wonderful," I replied. "I spent the afternoon reading to the children at the home. We're working through a collection of adventure stories, and they're absolutely captivated by them." "That's nice," David said, though I could hear the distraction in his voice. "Listen, Dad, I've been thinking about your house maintenance needs for the fall. I think we should get the gutters cleaned and maybe have someone look at the roof before winter." "That sounds reasonable," I agreed. "I could handle arranging all of that for you. I know you don't like dealing with contractors and scheduling appointments. I could take care of everything and just let you know when people are coming." On the surface, this sounded like a thoughtful offer, but I had become attuned to the underlying motivations behind such suggestions. David wasn't trying to save me trouble. He was trying to position himself as indispensable in managing my affairs. "I appreciate the offer, David, but I'm still capable of handling my own home maintenance decisions. If I need help, I'll ask for it." There was a pause on the other end of the line. "Of course, Dad. I didn't mean to imply otherwise. I just thought it might be easier for you." After we hung up, I sat in my chair thinking about the subtle ways my children had begun trying to insert themselves into my daily life and decision-making processes. It wasn't care. It was control. They wanted to be seen as essential to my well-being so that when the time came for inheritance discussions, they would appear to be the obvious and deserving recipients. The realization saddened me, but it also strengthened my resolve about the will. My children had become adults who viewed relationships in terms of benefit and return on investment. The children at the home, despite their difficult circumstances, understood love and gratitude in pure forms that my own children had somehow lost along the way. As autumn returned, I found myself thinking more frequently about mortality and legacy, not in a morbid way, but in a contemplative way that seemed natural for someone my age. I had lived a full life, loved a good woman, built a successful career, and raised 2 children to adulthood. Now, in what were likely my final years, I had found meaningful work that brought joy to children who needed it most. One October afternoon, almost exactly a year after the conversation that had changed everything, I was raking leaves in my backyard when I heard familiar voices coming through the kitchen window. David and Ruth were inside, having arrived while I was working outside. Curiosity and a sense of déjà vu compelled me to move closer to the house, where I could hear their conversation more clearly. "He's definitely slowing down," Ruth was saying. Did you see how long it took him to answer the door last week? And he's been forgetting little things, like where he put his reading glasses. I've noticed that too, David agreed. Plus all this volunteer work at the orphanage. He's there 3 days a week now. At his age, that's a lot of physical and emotional energy to spend. Do you think we should be concerned about his decision-making capacity? Ruth asked, and her tone made my blood run cold. I mean, if he's starting to decline cognitively, we might need to consider having someone else help him with important decisions. It's worth keeping an eye on, David replied. We certainly don't want him making any major financial decisions if his judgment is compromised. I stood frozen behind the oak tree, listening to my children discuss my mental competence with the same calculating tone they had used to discuss my possessions the year before. The thing is, Ruth continued, if Dad's judgment is declining, he might be vulnerable to people taking advantage of him. That place where he volunteers, they probably know he has money. What if they're influencing him to make donations he wouldn't normally make? That's a really good point, David said. We should probably find out more about this children's home place. Who runs it? What kind of fundraising they do? Whether they've been asking Dad for money? Should we talk to his doctor? Ruth asked. Maybe get his opinion on Dad's mental state? Let's not rush into anything dramatic, David cautioned, but we should definitely be more observant. And maybe we should start being more involved in his day-to-day affairs, just to make sure he's not being taken advantage of. I had heard enough. I quietly made my way around to the front of the house and came through the front door, making enough noise to announce my presence. Oh, hi, Dad, Ruth said brightly as I entered the kitchen. We were just chatting while we waited for you to come in. How are you feeling today? David asked, and I could hear the new undertone of evaluation in his voice. I'm feeling fine, I replied calmly. Exactly the same as I've felt for months. As they prepared to leave, both of them seemed more attentive than usual, asking more questions about my daily routine, my health, my activities. I realized they were now monitoring me for signs of cognitive decline that would justify their intervention in my affairs. That night, I called Harold and recounted the conversation I had overheard. Harold, they're now questioning my mental competence because I'm volunteering at the children's home. They think the organization might be manipulating me into making donations. Harold was quiet for a moment. Sam, this is concerning on multiple levels. Are you confident in your own mental clarity? Any concerns about memory or decision-making? Harold, you and I have been having complex conversations about legal and financial matters for months. My doctor gave me a clean bill of health at my last physical, including cognitive function. I'm volunteering successfully at the children's home, managing my own household, handling my own finances. There's nothing wrong with my mind. I agree completely, Harold said, which means your children are looking for ways to gain control over your decisions because they're concerned about their inheritance. Exactly. And now I'm wondering if I should accelerate my timeline for revealing the truth about my will. If they're going to start questioning my competence, I'd rather have that conversation while there's absolutely no doubt about my mental clarity. Harold agreed that this was a reasonable concern. Sam, you could always gather some documentation of your cognitive fitness, recent medical records, perhaps a letter from your doctor, evidence of your successful volunteer work. That way, if they ever try to challenge your decisions legally, you have clear proof of your competence at the time you made them. I decided to follow Harold's advice. The next week, I scheduled an appointment with my doctor and explained the situation. Dr. Martinez had been treating me for over 15 years and knew me well. She agreed to provide a written assessment of my cognitive function and mental competency, documenting that I was fully capable of making complex decisions about my personal and financial affairs. I also asked Margaret to provide a letter detailing my volunteer work at the children's home, including examples of the responsibilities I handled successfully and the positive impact I had on the children and the organization. With these documents in hand, I felt more confident about confronting my children when the time felt right. That time came sooner than I expected. In November, David and Ruth arrived for what I assumed would be a routine visit, but their demeanor was different, more serious and formal than usual. Dad, we need to talk with you about something important, David began, settling into the chair across from me while Ruth sat on the couch. "We've been concerned about some changes we've noticed in your behavior lately," Ruth added, her tone carefully neutral. I decided to let them continue and see where this conversation was heading. "We know you've been spending a lot of time at that children's facility," David said, "and we're worried that they might be taking advantage of your generous nature." "What do you mean by taking advantage?" I asked calmly. Ruth leaned forward. "Dad, these organizations are very sophisticated in how they cultivate donors. They build personal relationships, they make people feel needed and important, and then they ask for money. We're concerned that they might be manipulating your emotions. And we're also concerned about some changes in your memory and decision-making," David added. "Little things, but they add up. We think it might be time to consider having some help with managing your affairs." I looked at my children, these two people I had raised and loved and sacrificed for, as they attempted to manipulate me in exactly the ways they claimed others were doing. "I see," I said quietly. "And what kind of help do you think I need?" "Nothing dramatic," Ruth assured me. "Just someone to help with financial decisions, maybe review any major expenditures or commitments you're considering. We could help with that. It would give us all peace of mind." I stood up and walked to the kitchen, returning with a folder I had prepared weeks earlier. Inside were the letters from Dr. Martinez and Margaret, along with copies of my recent financial statements and other beliefs. Documentation of my competency. "Before we continue this conversation," I said, placing the folder on the coffee table, "I want you both to understand that my mental faculties are completely intact. Dr. Martinez has provided a comprehensive assessment of my cognitive function, and as you can see, I'm fully competent to make my own decisions." David and Ruth exchanged glances as I opened the folder and showed them the documentation. "I also want you to understand that my volunteer work at the children's home is meaningful and rewarding, and the organization has never asked me for money or tried to influence my financial decisions in any way." I paused to let this information sink in before continuing. "Now, I want to address the real issue here. I know that both of you are concerned about your inheritance. I know, because I heard you discussing it in this very room over a year ago." Ruth's face flushed. "Dad, I don't know what you think you heard," but I held up my hand to stop her. "I heard you calculating the value of this house, discussing Martha's jewelry collection, estimating the worth of my, workshop equipment. I heard you planning how to position yourselves to maximize your inheritance and discussing strategies for getting me to reveal my financial information." David started to speak, but I continued. "I also heard you refer to my remaining lifespan in terms of business planning and discuss how to manage me like a business transaction, rather than caring for me like a father who loves you and has spent his entire life providing for you." The silence in the room was deafening. David and Ruth sat frozen, their faces pale with the realization that their private conversation had been overheard and remembered. "Dad," Ruth finally whispered, "we never meant for it to sound like that. We do care about you." "Do you?" I asked quietly. "Because caring about someone means being interested in their happiness, their health, their emotional well-being. It means asking about what brings them joy and meaning. It means spending time together because you value the relationship, not because you're protecting an investment." David cleared his throat. "Dad, you're right that we've been concerned about practical matters, but that doesn't mean we don't love you. We're trying to be responsible, to make sure everything is handled properly when the time comes." "When the time comes," I repeated. "David, I'm 79 years old, not 99. I could live another 10 or 15 years. Are you planning to spend that entire time treating me like a business transaction?" Ruth was crying now, tears streaming down her face. "We're sorry, Dad. We really are. We got caught up in practical concerns, and we lost sight of what was really important." I felt a mixture of sadness and vindication watching my children's distress. Part of me wanted to comfort them, to tell them it was all right, and that we could move forward with better understanding. But a larger part of me knew that this moment was crucial for their understanding of what they had done and how it had affected me. "I want you both to understand something," I said, sitting back down and looking directly at each of them. "Your mother and I worked our entire lives to build something meaningful. Not just financially, but as a family. We taught you values. We showed you love. We sacrificed so that you could have better lives than we had. The money we accumulated was never the point. It was a byproduct of hard work and careful living. I paused to let them absorb this before continuing. But somewhere along the way, you forgot those lessons. You started seeing your inheritance as an entitlement rather than a potential gift. You started treating me like an obstacle to your financial goals, rather than as your father who deserves respect and genuine care. David leaned forward, his hands clasped tightly together. Dad, please tell us how to fix this. We know we've made mistakes, but we want to do better. I've spent this past year observing your behavior, hoping to see some change, some sign that you understood what really mattered. But instead, your visits became more strategic, your questions more probing, your concern more calculated. And now you're questioning my mental competence because I've found meaningful work that brings me joy. Ruth wiped her eyes with a tissue. The volunteer work, Dad, we should have asked you more about it. We should have been interested in what you were doing and why it mattered to you. Yes, you should have, I agreed. Do you know that the children at the home call me Grandpa Sam? Do you know that I help them with homework and read them stories and listen to their problems? Do you know that some of these children have been abandoned by their families, and yet they show more genuine affection and gratitude than my own children have shown me in years? The weight of my words settled over them like a heavy blanket. I could see the realization dawning that their behavior had been deeply hurtful, and that I had found comfort and purpose elsewhere. I've made some decisions, I continued, about my will and my estate that I think you should know about. Both David and Ruth tensed, waiting for what they clearly expected to be bad news. I've rewritten my will completely. The bulk of my estate, including this house, and most of my savings, will go to the children's home of Cedar Rapids to establish an educational fund in your mother's name. Ruth gasped, Dad, no, please don't do this because you're angry with us. I'm not doing this because I'm angry, I replied calmly. I'm doing this because it's the right thing to do. These children need opportunities for education and better lives. Your mother and I were blessed with resources we didn't really need beyond basic comfort. Using those resources to help children who have nothing seems like a much better legacy than simply transferring wealth to children who already live comfortably. David's voice was strained when he spoke. What about us? What about your grandchildren? Each of you will receive $25,000. That's enough to be meaningful, enough to help in times of genuine need, but not enough to replace the importance of your own hard work and responsibility. 25,000? Ruth's voice was barely a whisper. Dad, you're talking about hundreds of thousands of dollars going to strangers instead of your own family. Those children aren't strangers to me, I said firmly. I spend time with them. I know their names and their stories. I care about their futures. Can you say the same about your relationship with me? When was the last time either of you asked about my grief over losing your mother? When was the last time you were interested in my memories, or my experiences, or what I worry about late at night? End quote. The questions hung in the air unanswered because we all knew the answers. This doesn't have to be final, I continued. The will can be changed if I see genuine changes in how you treat me and view our relationship. But those changes would need to be real and sustained, not just temporary improvements designed to protect your inheritance. David stood up and began pacing the room. Dad, I understand that we've made mistakes. Big mistakes. But completely cutting us out of your inheritance feels extreme. We're your children. We've been part of your life for over 40 years. And you'll continue to be part of my life, I replied. But being my children doesn't automatically entitle you to my life savings. That entitlement has to be earned through love, respect, and genuine care. If you can demonstrate those qualities consistently over time, then we can discuss changing the will. Ruth looked up at me with red, swollen eyes. What would we need to do? How do we prove that we love you and not just your money? It was a fair question, and one I had thought about extensively. You could start by being interested in my life rather than just managing it. Ask me about my volunteer work, about the children I work with, about what brings me happiness. Visit me because you want to spend time with me, not because you're checking on your investment. Include me in your lives, Introduce me to your friends. Let your children know their grandfather as a person rather than just as a source of potential future wealth. I paused before adding, and most importantly, stop treating my remaining years as an inconvenience to be managed, and start treating them as precious time to build real relationships. The conversation continued for another hour, with David and Ruth asking questions about my decision and making promises about changing their behavior. I listened to their words carefully, trying to determine how much was genuine remorse and how much was strategic damage control. When they finally left, I felt emotionally drained but also relieved. The secret I had been carrying for over a year was finally out in the open. My children now understood the consequences of their behavior and had an opportunity to demonstrate real change if they chose to do so. Over the following weeks, I noticed some immediate changes in David and Ruth's behavior. They called more frequently, not to check on practical matters, but to ask about my day and my activities. They asked detailed questions about my volunteer work and seemed genuinely interested in the answers. Ruth even mentioned wanting to visit the children's home to see what I did there. But I remained cautious about these changes. I had learned that my children were capable of strategic behavior when it served their interests. The test would be whether these improvements continued over months and years, whether they became natural and authentic rather than calculated and temporary. During this period, I also spent considerable time reflecting on my own role in creating the situation. Had I spoiled my children by always providing for them without teaching them the value of earning things themselves? Had Martha and I failed to instill the right values, or had David and Ruth simply lost sight of those values as adults dealing with their own financial pressures and responsibilities? I discussed these questions with Harold during one of our regular meetings. "Sam, you can't take responsibility for the choices your adult children make," Harold counseled. "You and Martha raised them with good values. You provided for them and supported them through difficult times. Their decision to view you primarily as a source of inheritance reflects their own character, not failures in your parenting." "But Harold, I keep wondering if I made it too easy for them. If I had been less generous over the years, would they have learned to be more self-reliant and less focused on what they might inherit?" Harold considered this thoughtfully. "Perhaps, but you can't change the past. What you can do is make decisions going forward that reflect your values and priorities. Your decision to leave most of your estate to charity is consistent with the values you've always held. You're using your resources to help people who truly need them." As winter progressed, David and Ruth's behavior continued to show signs of improvement. They spent more time during their visits actually talking with me, rather than just checking on practical matters. They asked about my experiences growing up during the 1940s and 50s, about my relationship with their mother, about my work life, and the changes I had witnessed over the decades. Ruth brought her daughter Emma, my granddaughter, to visit more frequently. Emma was 16 now, old enough to have real conversations about life and the future. She was fascinated by my stories about the children's home and asked if she could volunteer there during her summer break. "I'd love to work with kids," Emma told me during one visit. "And it sounds like what you're doing there is really meaningful." Her interest seemed genuine and unprompted by her mother, which gave me hope that the values Martha and I had tried to instill might be emerging in the next generation. David started including me in family activities that went beyond dutiful visits. He invited me to his son's basketball games and to family barbecues, where I could interact with his friends and neighbors as a person rather than just as someone's elderly father who needed to be managed. These changes were encouraging, but I remained committed to giving the situation time to prove itself. Real change in adult behavior patterns takes months or years to solidify, not weeks. Meanwhile, my work at the children's home continued to provide deep satisfaction and purpose. I had expanded my role to include helping with basic life skills training for the older children, teaching things like how to manage money, how to apply for jobs, how to maintain a household. Skills that many children learn naturally from their parents, but that orphan children need to acquire through other means. Margaret had become not just a colleague, but a genuine friend. She often joined me for coffee after my volunteer sessions, and we would discuss the children's progress and the challenges facing the organization. "Mr. Bennett, she said during one of these conversations. "I want you to know that your presence here has changed this place, not just because of the practical help you provide, but because you've given these children something many of them have never had, a grandfather figure who cares about them unconditionally." Her words reinforced my conviction that directing my estate toward the children's home was the right decision. These children would benefit far more from educational opportunities and support services than David and Ruth would benefit from additional inherited wealth. Spring returned with a sense of renewal and possibility. David and Ruth's behavior had remained consistently improved for several months. They were showing genuine interest in my life and well-being, asking thoughtful questions, spending quality time during visits, and including me in their family activities in meaningful ways. I began to wonder if my ultimatum had achieved its intended effect. Had my children truly learned the lesson I was trying to teach, or were they simply performing improved behavior to protect their inheritance? The test came in an unexpected way. During a family dinner in April, Ruth mentioned some financial difficulties she and her husband were experiencing. Their business had lost a major client, and they were struggling to meet their mortgage payments and other obligations. "I'm sorry to hear about the business problems," I said. "That must be very stressful for both of you." Ruth nodded. "It is. We're looking at all our options, trying to figure out how to get through the next few months until we can find new clients." In the past, this would have been the moment when Ruth would have asked me for financial help, either directly or through hints about how a loan or gift would solve their problems. But she didn't ask. She simply shared the situation as something she was dealing with and moved on to other topics of conversation. Later that evening, after Ruth and her family had left, I called Harold to discuss what had happened. "She didn't ask for money," I told him. "A year ago, that conversation would have been leading up to a request for help, but she just shared what was happening and left it at that." "That's significant," Harold agreed. "It suggests that she's learned to see you as someone to talk to rather than someone to solve her problems financially." "I'm thinking about offering to help," I said. "Not because she asked, but because helping your children through genuine difficulties is what parents do." Harold thought this was a reasonable impulse. "The difference now is that any help you provide would be a gift freely given rather than a response to manipulation or pressure." I decided to wait a few days to see if Ruth would bring up the subject again or ask for help. When she didn't, I brought it up myself during my next conversation with her. "Ruth, I've been thinking about the business situation you mentioned. Would a short-term loan help you get through this difficult period?" She was quiet for a moment before responding. "Dad, that's incredibly generous of you to offer. It would definitely help, but I don't want you to feel obligated to solve our problems. We'll figure something out." "I'm not offering because I feel obligated," I replied. "I'm offering because you're my daughter and I care about your well-being. There's a difference between asking for help and accepting help when it's offered freely." We arranged for me to provide a loan that would help them through their immediate crisis. But more importantly, the way the situation unfolded convinced me that Ruth had genuinely learned something about our relationship and about the difference between treating me as a father versus treating me as a beret. Financial resource. David demonstrated similar growth a few weeks later when he called to ask for advice about a career decision he was facing. "Dad, I've been offered a position with a different company that would mean significantly more money, but also longer hours and more travel. I'm torn about whether to take it. What's making the decision difficult?" Well, I asked. "Well, the money would be great, especially with college expenses coming up for the kids, but I'd miss more family time, more opportunities to spend time with you and with my own children. I keep thinking about what you said about values and priorities." End quote. We had a long conversation about the trade-offs involved in career decisions and about the importance of maintaining relationships even when pursuing financial opportunities. David ultimately decided to negotiate with his current employer for a smaller raise that wouldn't require the additional travel and time commitments. "I realized that I don't want to become the kind of person who sacrifices everything for money," he told me. "I've seen how that damages relationships and I don't want to repeat that pattern." These conversations convinced me that both of my children had genuinely learned from our confrontation and had made real changes in their priorities and behavior. The question remained, should I change my will to reflect this improvement? I discussed this dilemma extensively with Harold over the summer. The changes seemed genuine and sustained, Harold observed. It's been almost 8 months since your confrontation with them, and their behavior has remained consistently improved. I agree, I said. But I'm still not sure I want to completely reverse my decision about the children's home. The work they do is so important, and the children there have real needs that would be met by the educational fund. Harold suggested a compromise approach. What if you modify the will to provide more substantial inheritances for David and Ruth, while still leaving a significant portion to the children's home? You could establish the educational fund in Martha's name, while also ensuring that your children receive meaningful inheritances. This suggestion felt right to me. I could acknowledge my children's improved behavior, while still supporting the children who had become so important to me through my volunteer work. We revised the will to leave $150,000 to each of my children, and the remainder of my estate, roughly $300,000, to establish the Martha Bennett Educational Fund at the Rye Children's Home. This felt like a fair balance that recognized both my children's place in my life and my commitment to helping disadvantaged children. I decided to tell David and Ruth about the change during a family gathering in late summer. All 3 of my grandchildren were present, along with my children and their spouses. It seemed like an appropriate setting for a discussion about family, values, and legacy. After dinner, as we sat in the living room where the whole journey had begun, I addressed the group. I want to talk with all of you about something important, I began. Over the past year, David and Ruth have shown me through their actions that they understand what really matters in family relationships. They've demonstrated genuine care and interest in my life. Not just in practical matters, but in what brings me joy and meaning." End quote. I could see David and Ruth exchanging glances, uncertain where this conversation was heading. Because of the changes I've seen, I've decided to modify my will. David and Ruth will each inherit $150,000, and the remainder of my estate will establish an educational fund at the children's home in your mother's name. Ruth started to cry, but this time they were tears of relief and gratitude rather than distress. "Dad," David said, his voice thick with emotion, "thank you for giving us the chance to show you that we learned from our mistakes. The inheritance isn't a reward for good behavior," I clarified. "It's a reflection of the genuine love and respect you've shown me. But I also want you to understand why the children's home remains important in my plans." I spent the next 30 minutes telling my family about my volunteer work, about the individual children I had come to care about the impact that educational opportunities could have on their lives. I explained that the money going to the children's home wasn't being taken away from my family. It was being directed toward children who had no family to provide for them. My granddaughter Emma spoke up. "Grandpa, I think what you're doing is beautiful. Those kids need help more than we do, and they're lucky to have you caring about them." Her words captured exactly what I had hoped my family would understand. Resources should go where they can do the most good, and sometimes that means looking beyond our immediate family to serve a greater need. As the evening wound down, Ruth approached me privately. "Dad, I want you to know that the money isn't what matters most to me anymore. What matters is that you know how much I love you and how sorry I am that it took almost losing your respect for me to understand what I was doing wrong." David expressed similar sentiments, adding, "The time I've spent really talking with you this past year, learning about your experiences and your wisdom, that's been more valuable than any inheritance could be." That night, lying in bed in the room I had shared with Martha for so many years, I felt a sense of peace and completion that had been missing since her death. My children had learned important lessons about values and relationships. I had found meaningful ways to spend my remaining years, and my life savings would continue to serve others long after I was gone. The months that followed were among the happiest of my later years. My relationships with David and Ruth continued to deepen as we built on the foundation of honesty and genuine care that had emerged from our difficult confrontation. My grandchildren became more involved in my life, asking questions about family history and seeming genuinely interested in maintaining connections with me. My work at the children's home continued to provide purpose and joy. I had become something of a fixture there, and the staff and children alike treated me like family. Margaret often joked that she couldn't imagine the place without me, and I couldn't imagine my life without the daily reminders of hope and resilience that the children provided. As my 80th birthday approached, David and Ruth began planning a celebration that would include extended family and friends from throughout my life. The planning process itself became an opportunity for us to reminisce about good times and to share stories and memories that strengthened our family bonds. During one of the planning conversations, Ruth said something that moved me deeply. "Dad, I want this party to be a celebration of the life you've lived and the impact you've had on so many people. Not just our family, but all the children at the home who call you Grandpa Sam, all the friends and colleagues who've been touched by your kindness over the years." The party itself was wonderful, but what meant the most to me was seeing how my children had organized it around celebrating my values and my relationships, rather than just marking another year of my life. As I looked around the room that evening, seeing children from the home talking with my grandchildren, seeing my old friends and colleagues sharing stories with my family, I realized that this was what legacy really meant. Not the money I would leave behind, but the relationships I had built, and the values I had passed on, and the lives I had touched along the way. The conversation I had overheard in my kitchen more than 2 years earlier had been one of the most painful experiences of my later years. But it had also led to one of the most meaningful chapters of my life. It had forced me to confront difficult truths about my relationships with my children, but it had also given us the opportunity to build something better and more genuine. Most importantly, it had led me to the children's home, where I had discovered that there was still important work for me to do, and where I had found a new kind of family among children who needed the love and stability that I was able to provide. As I write this story, I am 82 years old. My health remains good, my mind remains sharp, and my days remain full of purpose and meaning. David and Ruth have continued to demonstrate the values they learned during our difficult period, and our relationships continue to grow stronger. The children's home has become a central part of my life, and I know that the educational fund Martha and I will endow will continue to serve children for generations to come. Some of the children I worked with in my early days, they have already graduated from high school and gone on to college with scholarship support. Seeing their success and knowing that I played a small part in their achievements has been one of the greatest rewards of my entire life. The lesson I learned, and that I hope my children learned, is that our value as human beings isn't measured by our bank accounts or our possessions. It's measured by our capacity for love, our willingness to serve others, and our commitment to using whatever resources we have to make the world a little better than we found it. My children had temporarily lost sight of these values, but they found their way back. The children at the home had never had the luxury of forgetting these values, because their survival had always depended on their ability to appreciate kindness and to value genuine human connection over material wealth. In the end, overhearing that conversation in my kitchen was a gift, though it certainly didn't feel like one at the time. It gave me the information I needed to make better decisions about my relationships and my legacy. It led me to work that has brought immense satisfaction and purpose to my final years. And it created the opportunity for my children to examine their own values and priorities and to choose to become better people. I hope that anyone who hears this story will think carefully about how they treat the older people in their lives. Not just parents, but grandparents, neighbors, friends who have reached the stage of life where they're dependent on others for care and support. These people have lived full lives, accumulated wisdom and experience, and deserve to be treated with dignity and respect rather than being viewed as burdens or inconveniences. I also hope that parents will think about what they're teaching their children about money, inheritance, and family obligations. Children need to understand that inherited wealth is a privilege, not a right, and that it should be earned through genuine love and care rather than simply expected because of blood relationships. Most importantly, I hope people will remember that our time with our loved ones is limited and precious. None of us knows how much time we have left, either for ourselves or for the people we care about. That time should be spent building real relationships, sharing love and respect and genuine interest in each other's lives. The money will all be gone someday, distributed according to whatever plans we make or fail to make. But the relationships we build and the love we share, those are the things that truly matter and that create lasting legacies worth leaving behind. As I sit in my armchair this evening, the same chair where I first overheard my children's troubling conversation, I feel grateful for the journey that conversation set in motion. It was painful. It was difficult. But it led to growth and understanding and deeper relationships that I had ever imagined possible at this stage of my life. Tomorrow I'll return to the children's home, where a group of young children will be waiting for me to read them the next chapter in our current adventure story. They'll listen with rapt attention, ask thoughtful questions, and remind me once again that the most important gifts we can give each other have nothing to do with money and everything to do with time, attention, and genuine care. That's the lesson I hope my story teaches. That's the legacy I hope to leave behind. And that's the truth I learned when I discovered that sometimes the most painful conversations can lead to the most meaningful changes in our lives.